Delane Foster was 52 years old when she walked past her husband's open laptop on a Wednesday afternoon and saw the email that would change everything. She wasn't looking for anything. She was refilling her coffee. But there it was, a congratulations message Raymond had personally authored for a woman named Tanya Wells, praising her as visionary and irreplaceable, announcing her promotion to VP of Strategic Development. VP of a company Delane had built with her own hands 17 years ago, using her late mother's inheritance and her own engineering severance check. The same company Raymond walked through every morning, believing he'd earned his place in, never knowing his wife owned every inch of it. The same company where his COO title existed, only because she had quietly allowed it. He came home that evening, kissed her cheek, and told her there were exciting leadership changes at work. She nodded. She passed him dinner. She said absolutely nothing, because Raymond Foster had just promoted his mistress to VP of his wife's $500 million company, and he didn't even know the company was hers. What was coming next? He never saw it coming. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today, and if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The begonias needed new soil. Delane Foster had known it for a week. She could tell by the way the roots were crowding the edges of the terracotta pots, pressing outward, searching for room that wasn't there anymore. She understood that feeling. She knelt in the grass behind her house in Decatur, Georgia, and pressed her thumb into the dark soil and got to work. It was a Tuesday morning. The air was still cool, that particular softness that Georgia only offers for a few weeks before the heat closes in and means business. Birds were moving in the oak tree near the back fence. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started and then stopped. Delane breathed in and breathed out and thought about root systems. She had always been a woman who thought in structures. 17 years as a structural engineer had done that to her, had trained her to look at any given thing and locate what was holding it up. Load-bearing walls, tension points, the invisible architecture underneath everything people could see. She had been good at it. She had loved it, in the specific way you love work that asks something real of you. Then she had turned 44 and loved Raymond more, or believed she did, or believed that love required the sacrifice to prove itself. The details had softened over time. What she remembered clearly was the conversation. Raymond's firm wasn't going to move him up. He needed to be free to chase something bigger. Someone needed to hold things steady at home. She had volunteered. She had meant it at the time. That was 8 years ago. The begonias had been here for 5 of them. She lifted a root ball from its pot and turned it gently in her hands, loosening the bound edges the way she had learned to do. No force, just patience, just a slow coaxing outward. The garden was the one place she never had to explain her precision to anyone. It simply worked or it didn't, and she knew the difference. Inside the house, Raymond was finishing breakfast. She could hear the low rhythm of the morning news through the screen door, the scrape of his chair, the particular cadence of a man who moves through his mornings without friction because someone else has already removed it. She had made his lunch at 6:30, turkey on whole wheat, the Dijon he liked, an apple because he wouldn't eat one unless it appeared in front of him. It was sitting in the refrigerator in a brown bag with his name on a piece of tape, the way she'd been doing it for longer than she cared to calculate. She repotted the first begonia. She started on the second. The screen door opened at 7:42. She knew it was 7:42 because Raymond always left at 7:42 on Tuesdays. He was a man of sharp habits. She had stopped finding this charming at some point she could not precisely identify. "Heading out," he said, from the edge of the patio. "Drive safe." She did not look up. He crossed the yard toward her. She heard his footsteps on the pavers, and bent to press a kiss against her cheek. Quick, light. The gesture of a man checking a box he has checked so many thousands of times that he no longer needs to look at it. She smelled it then. Not her. Something lighter, something more deliberate than her own soap and the cedar of her dresser. A perfume, faint but present, caught in the fabric of his collar just below the jaw. The kind of trace that survives a morning at home only if it arrived recently enough and held on well enough. She felt nothing that moved through her face. She felt everything that didn't. "Have a good day," she said. "Always do." He was already walking. She watched him without turning. She didn't need to turn. She could track him by sound alone, had spent 24 years listening to the particular rhythm of this man moving through spaces. The gate latch, the side door of the garage, the low hum of the engine, the crunch of tires backing down the driveway, and then the sound of him going somewhere she was not. Then he was gone. The oak tree was still moving. The lawnmower down the street started again. The morning held its shape. Delaine looked at the begonia in her hands, the way the roots had grown dense and tangled from being too long in a space too small, and she set it carefully into the new pot. She pressed fresh soil around the base with both thumbs, firm and even, the way a thing needs to be held when it is learning where it belongs. She filed the perfume away the way she filed everything she wasn't ready to address yet. The way she had once filed a hairline crack in a foundation wall. Not alarm, not action. Not yet. Just noted. Just, this exists, and I know it exists, and when the time comes to measure it, I will know exactly where to look. She reached for the next pot. She had 3 more to go. Thursday came in gray and close, the sky pressing down low over Decatur like it couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten to. Delaine had spent the morning reorganizing the storage shelf in the laundry room, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do. She had woken at 5 with the smell of that perfume still sitting somewhere in her mind, not fading the way a real memory fades, but staying sharp, the way details stay sharp when a part of your brain has already decided they are evidence. Raymond was working from home. He did this on Thursdays sometimes, took calls from the kitchen island, spread his folders out, made himself visible in the house in a way that was supposed to feel like presence but mostly felt like weather, something you worked around. His laptop was open on the island at 9:15 when Delaine came in from the laundry room. He was not in the kitchen. She could hear him down the hall in his home office, his voice low and professional, the particular tone he used when he wanted whoever was on the other end to feel they were speaking to someone important. She had heard that voice for 2 decades. She knew every register of it. She crossed to the coffee maker. The pot had been sitting on the warmer long enough that what was left had gone thick and stale. She emptied it into the sink and started a fresh one, moving quietly, the way she had learned to move in spaces Raymond occupied when he was working. Small, unobtrusive, easy to overlook. While the coffee brewed, she turned to rinse her mug. The laptop screen was right there. She was not looking for anything. She was not searching. The screen was simply open and facing her, and the subject line of the most recent email in Raymond's inbox was sitting in plain sight, bold and unread. Congratulations, VP of Strategic Development, Tanya Wells, effective Monday. Delaine set the mug in the sink. She did not reach for it again. She read the subject line once. Then she stepped to the island and read the email chain from the beginning, the way she had once read structural assessments. From the ground up, every line, nothing skipped. The chain started with a message from Meridian's HR director confirming the promotion paperwork had been processed. Above it was the formal recommendation authored by Raymond. She read that part twice. It was too much. That was the first thing she recognized. Not the content, but the volume of it, the way the language swelled past what any COO should put in writing about a direct report. Visionary was in the 3rd line. Irreplaceable appeared twice. There was a sentence about Tanya Wells bringing a quality of thinking to the firm that Raymond described, in writing, in a professional document, as transformative in ways that go beyond her title. He had written about the energy she brings to every room, as though he were describing something he had experienced close up, from the inside, from a place too near to be professional. Delaine read it all the way to the bottom. Then she took her phone from her pocket. She held it steady. Her hands were steady. They had always been steady. She had once held measuring instruments on unstable scaffolding in a February wind, and her hands had been steady. And she photographed the screen. Clean. In frame. Legible. She put the phone back in her pocket. She went back to the coffee maker and poured her mug full and walked out to the garden. Raymond came home at 6:15, buoyant in the way he sometimes was when the day had confirmed something he already believed about himself. He set his bag down in the entryway and came to the kitchen where Delane was finishing dinner, and he poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and leaned against the counter, and he said, with the casual satisfaction of a man delivering good news he played a part in, "Big things happening at Meridian. Made some leadership moves this week. Real exciting." "Oh?" She stirred the pot without turning around. "Promoted someone to VP. Strategic Development." He swirled the glass. "She's sharp. Real asset to the firm." "That sounds like good news," Delane said. "It is. It really is." He was nodding to himself. She could tell without looking. "Sometimes you just know when someone's the right fit." She tasted the sauce, added a small pinch of salt. "Dinner in about 10 minutes. Smells good." He picked up his phone and carried his bourbon to the living room. That was all. That was the whole conversation. She set the table, she served the food, she asked about his call from that morning and listened to his answer and laughed in the right place when he said something he intended to be funny. She poured his water, she passed the bread. She performed the entire dinner with the smooth competence of a woman who has done something so many thousands of times that her hands know the choreography without asking her brain. She did not say one word she was thinking. Raymond was asleep by 10:30. He always slept easily. That had always seemed to her like information about a person. She sat in the chair by the bedroom window, in the dark, her phone in her lap. The screen was dim. She opened the photograph. The subject line sat at the top of the frame, crisp and black. "Congratulations, VP of Strategic Development, Tanya Wells, effective Monday." She looked at it for a long time. She called Walter at 7:15 the next morning, standing at the kitchen sink with her coffee, watching a cardinal work its way along the fence line in the backyard. "Walter?" She kept her voice the same way she kept everything these days, level, quiet, giving nothing away. "I need you to pull something for me, quietly. Meridian's internal HR records, promotions, accelerated hires, any compensation adjustments connected to Raymond's office, past 18 months. A brief pause. Walter Odom had been her CPA for going on 15 years. He did not ask unnecessary questions. It was one of the things she valued most about him. "I'll have it for you in 2 days," he said. "Thank you, Walter." She hung up. The cardinal had moved on. She refilled her coffee and stood there a moment longer, looking at the fence. And then she went to sit at the small writing desk in the corner of the living room, the one Raymond had always called her little desk, the one she had never corrected him on. And she opened the bottom drawer and took out a plain manila folder. Inside was a single document. 12 pages. The Articles of Organization for Beaumont Capital Partners, LLC. She did not need to read them. She had every line memorized. But she held them anyway, the way you hold something to remember that it is real. 17 years ago, she had been 45 years old with a severance check, a grief that had not finished moving through her yet, and a small inheritance from her mother, Gloria Beaumont, who had worked 31 years as a school administrator in Macon and died believing the $22,000 she'd saved was a modest thing to leave behind. It was not modest to Delane. It was a beginning. She had added the severance. She had called Carla, who had not asked a single question before writing the check. A short-term loan, structured properly, repaid in full inside of 2 years. With that, she acquired a struggling commercial real estate firm in Atlanta's West Side, the kind of company that had good bones and bad management, and needed someone who understood load-bearing structures to come in and figure out where the weight was being carried wrong. She understood load-bearing structures. She renamed it Meridian Group. She rebuilt it, methodically, quietly, the way she had always worked best. She established Beaumont Capital Partners as the parent holding company and registered everything under her maiden name, Gloria Beaumont's name, the name her mother had written in the front cover of every book she ever gave Delane, in her careful looping cursive. For my girl, G. Beaumont. She told Raymond she was doing some investing. He had nodded and moved on, the way he moved past most things that didn't center him. By the time Meridian crossed $200 million in assets under management, the ownership structure was airtight, documented, and invisible to anyone who hadn't been told exactly where to look. 8 years ago, Raymond had hit a wall at his previous firm, passed over for a promotion he had spent 2 years expecting. He had come home shaken in a way she hadn't seen in a long time, quieter, smaller, the arrogance briefly punctured, and she had made a decision. She loved him. She had believed in his capabilities, at least the genuine ones, and she had a company that needed a strong operational manager in its COO seat. She had arranged it through her board, quietly, cleanly. She told them Raymond Foster was a capable man who could run operations effectively, and that was true enough. She told herself it was an act of love. It was. She was certain of that, even now. It was love. It was also the most expensive thing she had ever given anyone. Walter called back on the second day, Friday afternoon, while she was deadheading the roses along the back porch. "Tanya Wells," he said without preamble. "Hired 14 months ago. The paperwork was expedited through Mr. Foster's office on a timeline roughly half the standard review period. He signed off on bypassing the committee himself." 14 months. She did the math without trying to stop herself. 14 months ago was before the promotion, before the email, before the words visionary and irreplaceable in a professional document. 14 months was 2 months after Nashville. "Thank you, Walter," she said. "One more thing. Raymond attended a conference in Nashville 2 months before that hire date. I need to find the hotel." "I can make some calls." "I have the receipt. I'll send you a photo." She found it in the accordion file she kept in the closet shelf, the one labeled Household/Travel/2023, because she kept everything, always had, a habit built from years of knowing that documentation was the difference between knowing something and being able to prove it. The hotel name was on the receipt. She searched it herself. She called the reservations line and explained calmly that she was trying to confirm a stay for her husband's expense reimbursement. The clerk, after a moment, confirmed the dates, confirmed the room type, double occupancy. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She held the phone in both hands. Outside, the Friday afternoon light was going gold through the curtains, and somewhere down the street a lawnmower started up, and the world sounded completely ordinary. She sat with it for a moment, just a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Carla. "I need you to come over," she said. Carla arrived at 8:47. Delane heard the car pull into the driveway, and then the front door — she had left it unlocked — and then the particular sound of Carla Price moving through a house she had been moving through for 30 years. Decisive steps, no hesitation. She came into the kitchen with a bottle of Blanton's in one hand and a yellow legal pad in the other. She was wearing a gray sweatsuit and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she looked at Delane the way she had always looked at Delane when something serious had arrived, directly and without performance. She set the bourbon on the table. She set the legal pad beside it. She pulled out the chair across from Delane and sat down. "Talk," she said. So Delane talked. She laid it out the way she laid everything out, in order, with precision, without editorializing. She placed her phone on the table and pulled up the photograph of Raymond's email first. Carla read it. She didn't say anything. Her expression didn't change, exactly, but something behind her eyes went very still. Then the hotel receipt, the Nashville dates, the clerk's confirmation. Then Walter's findings, the accelerated hire, Raymond's signature bypassing the committee, the 14-month timeline that lined itself up like a row of load-bearing columns no one had bothered to inspect. Then, last, the perfume. She mentioned it almost as an afterthought, the way you note a hairline crack in a foundation wall, not the emergency, but the first sign that something beneath the surface has been wrong for longer than you knew. When she finished, Carla was quiet for a moment. She uncapped the bourbon. She poured 2 glasses, pushed one across the table, and took a slow sip from the other. Then she set her glass down and picked up her pen. "Do you want a divorce?" she said. "Or do you want justice?" Delane didn't hesitate. "Both, but justice first." Carla nodded, like this was exactly the right answer, and she had already known it would be. She clicked her pen. "Then we build something," she said. They worked through the night. Carla wrote in her cramped, efficient print, filling page after page of the legal pad while Delane talked and thought and occasionally got up to refill the glasses. The kitchen table became a desk, phone photographs arranged by date, the hotel receipt, printed copies of Walter's findings, the original Beaumont Capital Articles of Organization that Delane retrieved from the bottom drawer of the little desk in the living room and placed in the center of the table like a cornerstone. 3 pillars, Carla said around midnight. She had drawn a horizontal line across a fresh page and labeled 3 columns underneath it. Personal, professional, financial. You don't move on any of them until all 3 are ready. You don't move on one and give the others time to adjust. Delane looked at the 3 columns. She thought about load distribution, about what happened when you applied force to a structure unevenly. "Agreed," she said. Under personal, Carla wrote Gerald Watkins' name without being asked. Gerald had spent 30 years in Atlanta family law and had a reputation that was almost entirely built on the specific quality of never losing. Delane knew who he was. She had always known who he was, the way she had always quietly known the names of people she might one day need. "The marital assets," Carla said, her pen moving. "Almost everything is funded by Beaumont Capital dividends." "Yes. And Raymond signed the renewal documents 3 years ago, the ones that function as a postnuptial. He didn't read them carefully." "He never does." Carla wrote something and underlined it. "Gerald will tell you there's nothing to contest. I'm telling you now, so it isn't a surprise when he says it." Under professional, Carla wrote 2 things: all hands and board coordination. They talked through the structure of it, a company-wide leadership meeting, authorized through Beaumont Capital, with language formal enough to signal significance, but not so unusual that Raymond would read it as anything other than a corporate formality. He would be asked to coordinate the logistics. He would do it gladly. He always did the things that made him feel important. "He'll think he's running point," Delane said. "He'll be right about that," Carla said. Under financial, Delane made the decision she had been turning over since Walter's call that afternoon. "I want an independent forensic audit of the Strategic Development Division," she said. "Outside firm. No existing relationship with Meridian. Walter retains them directly through Beaumont Capital." "On what grounds do we communicate it internally?" "We don't have to explain ourselves. A parent company audit is routine. Nobody at Meridian will question it." She paused. "But I want it thorough. Everything. Vendor contracts, payment authorizations, approval chains. Everything that touches that department." Carla wrote it down. She was already thinking something, Delane could tell. There was a particular quality to her silence when her mind was ahead of the conversation. "You're expecting to find something," Carla said. Delane looked at her. "I'm expecting to be certain." Carla left just before 5 in the morning, the legal pad tucked under her arm, the bourbon bottle nearly finished. Delane sat alone at the kitchen table. The overhead light was too bright for the hour. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to go from black to a deep, exhausted gray. She looked at the legal pad page in front of her. Her own handwriting this time, notes she had made in the margins of Carla's columns. 3 pillars, everything documented, everything in order. A structure with no weak points, designed to hold exactly the weight it was about to carry. She had spent 17 years building things people didn't know she'd built. She had spent 24 years loving a man who never looked closely enough to see what was in front of him. Both of those things had been true at the same time, for a long time. The grief was still there. She wasn't foolish enough to think it wasn't. But underneath it, something had shifted. the way a foundation settles, not breaking but compressing, finding its final, solid form. She sat with it, the quiet, the gray morning, the legal pad on the table in front of her. She was ready to build. The begonias needed water on Wednesday morning. The soil along the back fence needed turning. The church auxiliary needed someone to organize the food pantry shelves before Saturday's distribution. Delane did all of it. She moved through the week the way she always moved through weeks, steadily, purposefully, one task finished before the next one began. The audit was running. Walter had confirmed the outside firm was on site at Meridian Tuesday afternoon. There was nothing for her to do but wait, and Delane had always known how to wait. Waiting was not the same as being still. Waiting was just work that hadn't announced itself yet. But the memories came anyway. They came the way they always came, not in a flood, but in pieces, small and specific, the kind that don't ask permission. She was 41, standing in a beige banquet hall at one of Raymond's industry dinners. A chandelier above them that was trying too hard. The smell of lukewarm chicken and somebody's too strong cologne. Raymond's hand at the small of her back, steering her toward a cluster of his colleagues. "And this is my wife," he had said, then turned to shake someone's hand before anyone had a chance to ask her name. She had stood there with her glass of sparkling water and smiled at the people who were already looking past her, at Raymond, who was already telling a story, and she had thought, I should have introduced myself. But the moment had closed. They always closed fast. She had let it go. She had let many things go. She had been very good at that. At 47, she had sat across from Raymond at the kitchen table, this same kitchen, and told him she was thinking about going back to work. Not engineering, necessarily. Something adjacent. Consulting, maybe. She had spent the previous 3 months quietly researching it. She had names of firms. She had made calls. Raymond had looked at her with an expression that was almost kind. "Dee," he had said, "you've been out of the field for years. You know how fast things move. Starting over at your age," he had shaken his head, slow and certain, "you'd be competing with people 15 years younger than you. I just don't think it's realistic." He had said it gently. He had said it as though he was protecting her from something. She had nodded. She had let the conversation end. She had not told him that 3 weeks earlier she had quietly signed a $12 million acquisition agreement through Beaumont Capital. She had not told him that the firm she was supposedly too old to consult for was one she had already outgrown. She had packed his lunch the next morning and gone back to her garden. The dinner party memory was the one that still had a temperature to it. 2 years ago. Friends of Raymond's, colleagues really, people he collected the way ambitious men collect evidence of their own importance. A long table, good wine, and Raymond comfortable and expansive the way he always was in rooms where everyone was watching him. Someone had made a comment about a mutual acquaintance's wife, something mildly unkind. Laughter ran around the table. Raymond had looked at Delane across the centerpiece and smiled. "Well, at least I don't have to worry about Delane going anywhere," he had said. "She's too comfortable." He had patted his own stomach lightly, an actor's gesture. "We both are." More laughter, easy, meaningless laughter. Delane had smiled. She had lifted her wine glass. She had said nothing. That night she had lain awake and thought about what it cost to stay quiet. Not in that moment, but across all the moments added up together, the accumulated weight of every joke framed as affection, and every introduction without a name, and every conversation that ended before she was finished. She had calculated it the way she had once calculated stress loads. The thing about structural damage was that it rarely announced itself all at once. It accumulated, quietly, over time, until the day it didn't. On Thursday, she drove past Meridian at noon. She told herself she was running errands. She was also running errands. But she turned down the block where Meridian's building sat. Glass and steel, 11 stories, the lobby she had designed the interior specifications for and never once entered. And she slowed the car without deciding to. They came out at 12:22. Raymond held the door. Tanya Wells walked through it ahead of him, and then they were both on the sidewalk and close. Close in the specific way of people who have stopped noticing how close they stand. Tanya said something. Raymond laughed, his whole body in it the way it got when he was performing happiness for someone he wanted to impress. Delaine sat in her car across the street and watched them walk down the block and around the corner and out of sight. She watched the whole thing. She didn't look away. She had learned, a long time ago, that looking away didn't make a thing smaller. It just meant you hadn't measured it. She drove home. She changed into her garden clothes. She went outside. The weeds along the south bed had been working their way under the edging for weeks. She pulled them by hand, root by root, fingers deep in the dark soil, the sun pressing down on her shoulders through the fabric of her shirt. She did not think about the sidewalk outside Meridian. She did not think about Raymond's laugh. She pulled weeds. She moved down the bed. She kept her hands in the dirt. By the time her fingers ached enough to stop her, the south bed was clean. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. The begonias, pink and full and stubbornly alive. The dark soil turned over and clear of everything that didn't belong there. She stayed like that for a while, kneeling in the dirt, completely composed. The grief was in there somewhere. She knew that. But she had given it its hour. She had given it more than its hour, more than once, and it had done what grief does when a disciplined woman holds it. It had settled and compacted and gone still. There was nothing left in her chest now but something solid, something that had been forming for weeks, the way concrete cures, slowly, under pressure, until it is harder than everything around it. She picked up her trowel. Walter called on a Friday afternoon. Delaine was sitting in her car in her own driveway, just back from the grocery store. She hadn't gone inside yet. She didn't know why. Sometimes the body knows things before the mind catches up. She picked up on the second ring. Walter. Delaine. His voice was the same as it always was, flat, unhurried, carrying information the way a pipe carries water. No extra pressure, no drama, just delivery. The outside firm finished their preliminary findings this morning. I have reviewed everything. You're going to want to hear this. Go ahead. She heard paper move on his end, the soft click of a pen cap. During Tanya Wells's time as senior director, before the VP promotion, she authorized 2 vendor contracts. Both were routed through strategic development. Combined value is $1.4 million. Delaine was quiet. The vendor is listed as Apex Strategic Solutions, consulting firm supposedly. I had my contact at the outside firm do a full background check. Walter paused, not for effect. Walter never paused for effect, but because what came next required its own space. There is no verifiable office address. The website domain was registered 14 months ago and has no functional content. There are no documented deliverables attached to either contract. No reports, no deliverables, no evidence that Apex Strategic Solutions has ever done a single day of work for anyone. The grocery bags were sitting in the back seat. She could see them in the rearview mirror. Eggs, a rotisserie chicken, the cilantro Raymond liked. Who signed for the account? She asked. The business banking account is registered to a Deshaun Wells. Date of birth puts him at 31. Walter let that sit for 1 second. I ran the name. Tanya Wells has one younger brother. His name is Deshaun. Delaine closed her eyes. $1.4 million. Her money. Walked out the door and into a shell company, and into the pocket of a woman who had then walked down the sidewalk outside her building, shoulder to shoulder with Delaine's husband, laughing at something. Raymond's signature? She asked. On both internal approval forms, submitted to the Finance Committee with his COO endorsement. The committee approved without additional scrutiny. Raymond's endorsement was considered sufficient. Walter's voice stayed even. Whether he knew what he was signing or whether he simply didn't read carefully, I can't say. But his name is on the documents either way. She opened her eyes. The afternoon light was low and orange through the windshield. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. 2 doors down, a sprinkler was running in slow, patient arcs across a front lawn. "Thank you, Walter," she said. "Send everything to my secure folder. I'll be in touch within the hour." She hung up and sat very still for a moment. Not processing. She had already processed it, somewhere beneath the words, in the time it took Walter to say them. What she was doing now was just making room for the full shape of it. $1.4 million. Raymond's signature. A brother. A shell. Her money. She picked up her phone and called Carla. Carla didn't say anything for the first 15 seconds after Delane finished. That was unusual. Carla always had something to say. Then, Deshaun Wells. Her voice was the specific kind of quiet that meant she was already thinking several steps ahead. Baby brother. That's correct. So she didn't just bring herself into this company. She brought a scheme. That's what the documents show. Another pause. Then Carla exhaled, slow and deliberate, the way a person exhales when they are choosing not to say 6 different things at once. All right. The referral documentation. I want it structured so that when it lands on the General Counsel's desk and the Secretary of State's office simultaneously, there is no sequence of events in which Tanya Wells has time to prepare a response. It all arrives at once. Agreed. Same moment as the termination. Same moment, Delane confirmed. Good. The scratch of Carla's pen on paper came through the phone. I'll have the draft ready tonight. You review it tomorrow morning and we finalize before Thursday. They worked through the structure together, right there. Delane still in the driver's seat, the groceries still in the back. It took 40 minutes. By the end, the referral documentation had a shape, clean, airtight, every figure sourced to the forensic audit, and every name attached to a verifiable record. When she hung up with Carla, she sat for another minute. Then she dialed Gerald Watkins. Gerald was not a man who used unnecessary words. That was why she'd chosen him. He had reviewed the full asset structure 2 weeks earlier, at her request, along with the post-nuptial agreement Raymond had signed 3 years ago, during what she had told him was a routine financial planning document renewal. Raymond had signed it in the kitchen on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee in his other hand, 3 pages in, without slowing down. "I've gone through everything thoroughly," Gerald said. "The marital assets are funded almost entirely by Beaumont Capital dividends. The agreement Raymond signed is enforceable in full. Given the asset structure, the division favors you overwhelmingly. There is no substantive basis for contest." "Nothing he can challenge?" "Nothing that would hold." "Thank you, Gerald." She hung up. She picked up the grocery bags from the back seat. She carried them up the front walk and through the door and set them on the kitchen counter. She washed her hands. She pulled the cilantro from the bag and began making dinner. Raymond's headlights swept across the kitchen window as his car turned into the driveway. Patrice came by on a Sunday afternoon the way she always did. No call ahead, just the soft knock of someone who has been a neighbor long enough to know she's welcome. She was carrying a small dish of pound cake wrapped in foil, which meant she'd been baking, which meant her daughter had called and the call had gone badly, which meant she needed somewhere to sit that wasn't her own house. Delane knew all of this without asking. 11 years next door teaches you a person's patterns. "Sit," Delane said. "I'll get the tea." They settled on the back porch the way they always did, Patrice in the wide wicker chair, Delane in the one beside it, the yard spread out in front of them in the warm, easy quiet of a Sunday with nowhere to be. The begonias were doing well this week. Delane had noticed it that morning. Patrice talked. She talked about her daughter, briefly and without too much detail, just enough to discharge whatever had been sitting on her chest, and then about her church's building committee, which had opinions, and about the weather, which had finally remembered it was supposed to be gentle. Delane listened and refilled the tea and said the right things at the right moments. Then Patrice tilted her head, the way she did when a memory surfaced that she hadn't planned on sharing. "You know, I keep meaning to mention something. It's probably nothing." "What's that?" "I saw Raymond a while back, out at that restaurant on Whitmore, the Italian one with the green awning." Patrice waved a hand loosely. Must have been springtime. April, maybe. I was meeting my cousin for lunch. She took a small sip of her tea. He was with a younger woman. I thought it was a work thing at first, but then I remembered her face. I'd seen her photo on Meridian's website when I was looking into their community work. They had that piece about the Southside Project. She shrugged. Pretty girl, dark blazer. They looked like they were having a nice time. The afternoon continued around them. A bird moved through the yard. The sprinkler 2 doors down kicked on with its familiar stutter. Springtime, Delane said. Around then. April, I'd guess. Her spring anniversary was April 14th. She knew the date the way she knew load tolerances and soil composition, precisely, without effort, because she had filed it correctly and never let it blur. April 14th. 24 years. Raymond had come home that morning with tulips, her mother Gloria's favorite flower. He had made a reservation at the restaurant where they had their first date, the one on the north side with the low lighting and the bread they baked in-house. He had given a toast, glass raised, looking directly at her. 24 years of choosing you. He had touched his glass to hers. He had looked her in the eye. He had come home from lunch with Tanya Wells and brought his wife tulips. Delane? Patrice was watching her with the gentle attention of a woman who had spent 30 years reading faces. Everything all right? Of course. Delane stood smoothly. Let me get us more tea. She walked through the back door and down the short hall to the bathroom. She closed the door. She turned on the faucet. She gripped the edge of the cold porcelain sink with both hands and looked at herself in the mirror. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The way she had learned to breathe in the field when a project was in crisis and someone needed to stay level enough to think. She had been that person every time. She was that person now. The tulips had been in a blue vase on the dining table for a week after. She had changed the water every day. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. She straightened. She dried her hands. She turned off the faucet. When she came back to the porch, she refilled Patrice's glass and settled back into her chair. How is Marcus doing with Little League? She asked. Last you told me he was working on his swing. Patrice's face lit up the way it always did at the mention of her grandson. She talked for 20 minutes about Marcus, his batting stance, his coach, the tournament in August, and Delane listened to every word. Patrice left around 5. Pound cake dish empty, looking considerably lighter than she'd arrived. Delane washed the glasses, dried them, put them away. Then she went to the kitchen table, sat down, and called Carla. Carla picked up on the first ring. Schedule the board, Delane said. I want the all-hands meeting set for this Thursday. A beat. Then Carla said, Done. I'll make the calls tonight. She did. By Monday morning, Beaumont Capital's board had been formally contacted. Meridian's executive assistant received the meeting request before 9 a.m. Q3, Strategic Review and Ownership Address, Thursday, 9 a.m., all staff required. And by 10, the assistant had notified Raymond, who was tasked with coordinating the room setup, the AV equipment, and the staff communication. He sent Delane a text at 10:47 that said, Busy week ahead. Big ownership meeting Thursday. She read it while standing at the counter. She set her phone down and stirred her coffee. That evening, Raymond passed the bread basket across the dinner table and said, There's some big meeting at Meridian Thursday. Ownership wants an all hands. I'll need to be there early to set up. He said it with the particular pride of a man who feels important in a room. Could be a big day. That sounds important, Delane said. She passed him the bread. The alarm was set for 5:30. Delane was already awake at 4:52. She lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the particular quiet of a house before the world starts up again. Raymond was breathing slow and even beside her. She studied the ceiling. Then she got up. The kitchen was cool and dim. She measured the coffee the way she always did, 2 level scoops, no more, no less, and stood at the counter while it brewed. Outside, the backyard was still just shapes. The begonias were out there somewhere in the dark, patient as they always were. She poured her cup. She sat at the kitchen table. She did not look at her phone. She did not go over the plan again. The plan was already built. You do not recalculate a load-bearing structure on the morning of the inspection. She sat with her coffee and let the quiet be quiet. She showered slowly, without hurry. She washed her hair and stood under the hot water a moment longer than necessary, not because she was stalling, but because today was a day that deserved its full preparation. She did her hair at the bathroom mirror, section by section, the way her mother had taught her when she was 10 years old. You start at the back, and you work forward. That way nothing gets missed. Gloria Beaumont had said that about a lot of things, Delane thought. It applied to more than hair. She applied her makeup with the same patience, tinted moisturizer, a line of brown along the lid, mascara, a dark plum lip that was close enough to the burgundy that, when she finally put the suit on, the whole thing would hold together as one deliberate statement. The suit was hanging on the back of the closet door. She had bought it 6 months ago at a boutique in Midtown, on a Tuesday afternoon when she was supposed to be running errands. She had not planned to buy it, but she had walked past the window, and it had been on the mannequin. Structured shoulders, nipped waist, the fabric a deep burgundy that didn't announce itself, just settled into a room and stayed. She had gone in. She had tried it on. The tailor had taken in the seams at the back while she waited. She had worn it once since then. Alone, in the bedroom, door closed, the afternoon light coming through the curtains. She had stood in front of the mirror for a long time. She had not been able to name exactly what she was looking for. But when she found it, the woman looking back at her, straight-shouldered, still, taking up exactly the amount of space she was owed, she understood what she had been preparing for. She had zipped the suit into its garment bag and put it back on the hook. She had not touched it again until this morning. Now she dressed carefully, zipped the jacket, smoothed the front, stood before the mirror. She looked at herself the way she looked at a finished structure, checking for error, finding none. She left the room without waking Raymond. Downstairs, she rinsed her coffee cup and set it in the rack to dry. She wiped down the counter. She straightened the chair she had pulled out from the table. She did not make Raymond's lunch. She heard him moving upstairs around 6:15. The shower, then the familiar creak of the closet door, then his footsteps on the stairs. He came into the kitchen, already wearing his jacket, phone in hand, the low-grade energy of a man with somewhere important to be. "You're up early," he said, moving to the coffee maker. "Couldn't sleep," she said. It was close enough to true. He poured his coffee and drank half of it standing at the counter, scrolling his phone. He talked about the meeting, the setup, the projector he'd asked facilities to test, the fact that he wanted to be there by 7:30 to make sure everything was right. He used the word ownership twice in a way that landed wrong in her chest, though her face gave nothing. At 6:38, he set his mug in the sink. Not the rack, never the rack. Picked up his keys and kissed her on the cheek. "Big day," he said. "Yes," she said. She watched him walk to the door. She watched the door close behind him. She stood at the kitchen window and watched his car back slowly down the driveway, headlights cutting through the pale early dark, and then turn onto the street and disappear. She breathed. Then she picked up her keys. Meridian Group's headquarters sat on Peachtree Industrial, in a glass and stone building she had chosen herself 17 years ago because the bones of it were sound and the location had room to grow. She had not been inside in over 2 years. She had never needed to be. She pulled into the parking garage on the north side, second floor, visitor section. She walked to the elevator, wrote it down, and crossed to the main lobby entrance. The lobby was polished and clean. A young woman sat behind the front desk with neat locks and a headset. Kezia, according to the staff directory Delane had reviewed Monday evening. 3 years in the lobby. She had sent back wrong coffee 6 times and never once received an apology from the woman who sent it. Kezia looked up with the pleasant, neutral expression of someone trained to handle anyone who walked through the door. Delane stopped at the desk. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Delane Beaumont Foster. I'm the owner of this building. I'd like to go up." Kezia blinked. Something shifted behind her eyes, a quick recalibration. the face of a person suddenly aware that she is in a different kind of moment than she expected. She picked up the phone without a word and dialed. The executive boardroom on the 14th floor was still and orderly when Delane walked in. Walter Odom sat at the far right of the long table, his reading glasses already on, a document folder open in front of him, with the particular neatness of a man who had been ready for 20 minutes and was simply waiting. Beside him, Meridian's general counsel, a compact man named Douglas Hale, who had reviewed the legal findings twice and had no remaining questions, sat with his own folder closed and his hands flat on the table. Two Beaumont Capital board members Delane had known for a decade sat across from them. Miriam Cho, who had joined the board in the firm's 5th year and who had spent every year since being quietly correct about everything, and Bernard Grant, who had a background in corporate governance and who had said, when Carla briefed him on Tuesday, only, "Whatever Delane needs." And at the near end, beside an empty chair, sat Carla Price. She was wearing gray. Her legal pad was in front of her, already half filled with neat lines of writing. Her reading glasses were pushed up onto her head. There was a small cup of coffee at her right hand that she had clearly brought herself, because the boardroom's coffee service was not yet set up, and Carla was not a woman who waited on coffee. She looked up when Delane walked in. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. 12 years of friendship speaks in expressions before it speaks in words, and what Carla's expression said, plainly and without performance, was, "You look right in that room." Delane took her seat, at the head of the table. She had never sat there. The chair was wider than she expected, and the view from it was different. The whole length of the table laid out in front of her, every face visible, every document within reach. She settled into it the way she had settled into the suit that morning, without ceremony, without apology, like something long overdue finally returned to its rightful place. She looked at each person in turn. Walter, Hale, Miriam, Bernard, Carla. "Is everything in order?" she asked. Walter said, "Complete." Hale said, "All documents are signed and ready for distribution." Carla picked up her pen. "We're ready when you are." Delane looked down at the table. At the document in front of her, the Beaumont Capital Ownership Charter, her name at the top, her mother's name in the company name, 17 years of work reduced to a single clean piece of paper that was, somehow, everything. She closed the folder. She stood. She straightened her jacket, one smooth pull at the lapels, the way you check a structure before you put weight on it. She walked to the door, opened it, and moved toward the conference hall where 80-plus Meridian employees were assembled and waiting. The conference hall was full, 83 people by the seating chart Walter had pulled from the facilities request, department heads in the front rows, project managers and analysts filling the middle, administrative and support staff along the sides and back, the people who kept the building running, who answered phones and tracked invoices and sent back wrong coffee orders without complaint. Delane walked in from the side entrance and the room changed. Not loudly. It wasn't a gasp or a commotion. It was the specific quality of silence that happens when a large group of people simultaneously realize they don't have the right category for what they're seeing. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The room settled into itself the way a held breath settles. Raymond was at the front, standing near the presentation screen with the easy posture of a man expecting to be visible when the important people arrived. He was in the charcoal suit he saved for significant occasions. His hands were loose at his sides. He was already smiling at something a department head near him had said. Then he saw her. The smile stayed on his face for 2 full seconds after it had stopped meaning anything. His eyes found the burgundy suit, then her face, and something behind his expression went quiet in a way she had never seen on him before. Not confusion, exactly. Something deeper. Something that recognized, before his mind could name it, that the ground had changed. She did not look at him. She did not need to yet. Tanya Wells was in the second row, center seat. Notepad open, pen uncapped, blazer pressed to a knife's edge. She had the focused readiness of a woman who had decided that being seen as prepared was its own form of power. She looked up when the energy shifted, tracking the room the way someone calculating angles tracks a room, and found Delane moving to the podium. She looked at the burgundy suit. She looked at the walk, unhurried, direct, the walk of someone who had already arrived before she entered the room. Something in Tanya's expression recalculated, quickly, but not quickly enough to settle into anything confident. Delane reached the podium. She did not tap the microphone. She did not clear her throat. She simply stood there, both hands resting lightly on the edges of the stand, and waited for the last murmur to die. It died. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Delane Beaumont Foster. I am the founder and sole beneficial owner of Beaumont Capital Partners, which is the parent holding company of Meridian Group. This company has been under my ownership for 17 years. She let that sit for a moment, let the room do what rooms do with information that rearranges everything. "I've called this meeting because a forensic audit recently completed by an independent accounting firm, retained by Beaumont Capital and conducted without involvement from Meridian's internal finance team, identified serious operational and ethical concerns within this organization. Concerns I am addressing today, directly and formally." She looked down at the second row. Tanya Wells. The name landed like a flat stone on still water. Tanya did not flinch. She was too practiced for that, but her pen stopped moving. "As of this morning," Delane said, "you hold the title of Vice President of Strategic Development. That title is 11 days old, and it will not reach 12. She kept her voice even and clear, the same voice she had used for 17 years of board calls and contract reviews. "The forensic audit identified 2 vendor contracts authorized during your tenure as senior director, totaling $1.4 million, paid to a firm called Apex Strategic Solutions. Apex has no verifiable office address, no professional history, and no documented deliverables. The business account is registered to a signatory named Deshaun Wells, your brother." The room was absolutely still. "Your employment at Meridian Group is terminated, effective immediately, for cause. The full documentation has been transferred to legal counsel. Meridian will cooperate with any inquiry that follows." Tanya stood up. She rose from her chair with the controlled energy of a woman who had prepared for resistance and had something ready to say, something sharp and lawyerly and constructed to reframe what had just happened. She opened her mouth. Delane raised one hand. Not high, not dramatically, just a hand, lifted, palm out. A stop sign that didn't need to be a stop sign because it had never been anything else. The room held. "This is not a conversation," Delane said. From the left side of the hall, Meridian's head of security moved forward with complete professionalism. He reached Tanya's row, stepped in quietly, and gestured toward the door. Tanya stood very still for one moment. Her jaw was tight. Her notepad was still open on the chair. She left it there. She walked out without speaking, and the doors closed behind her, and the room exhaled. Delane looked out at the faces in front of her, some stunned, some wide-eyed, a few in the back rows who were very carefully not showing what they were feeling. She spoke for another 4 minutes. The transition plan, Walter's interim financial oversight, the Beaumont Capital Board's continued commitment to the firm's operations and its people. She answered no questions because she did not open the floor for questions. When she was finished, she thanked the room for its time. Then she turned to Raymond. He was still standing near the screen. He had not moved since she walked in. The charcoal suit looked different now. Less significant somehow, like something borrowed. "Raymond," she said, quietly enough that it was only for him. "Please join me in the boardroom." He sat across from her at the long table, Carlo was at the near end, legal pad open, pen in hand, watching him the way a retired attorney watches a man who is about to understand something for the first time. Walter sat 2 seats down, folder closed, glasses off. Douglas Hale, Meridian's general counsel, was at the far end with the particular stillness of a man who has seen the documentation and has no remaining surprises. Delane did not open with anger. She opened with facts. She told him about Nashville. She told him the dates, when he left, when Tanya Wells' accelerated hire was submitted to HR, the timeline that ran from a 3-day conference to a 14-month affair in a straight, documentable line. She placed Walter's HR findings on the table, the hotel record beside them. She told him about the vendor approvals, the 2 forms bearing his signature, the $1.4 million in her company's money that had moved through a shell account to his girlfriend's brother while he signed off on it without reading what he was signing. She told him about April 14th. She said it plainly, without flinching, because she had already done her flinching weeks ago, alone, where it belonged. She told him she knew about the restaurant 2 miles away, and the lunch, and the afternoon he came home with tulips and sat across from her at their first date table and said, 24 years of choosing you, while looking her in the eye. She watched him hear that last part. He started with explanation. Then the explanation ran out of road, and he moved to apology. And the apology was genuine in the particular way of apologies made by men who have just run out of every other option. His voice cracked once. He pressed his hand flat on the table. He said her name. Then he said, Delane, look, I know you're hurt, but you don't understand how this business works. You can't just walk in here and— She slid the document across the table. It stopped in front of him. He looked down. The Beaumont Capital Partners founding charter, her signature at the bottom, her maiden name, Beaumont, in the company name at the top. The date? 17 years ago. He stared at it. She let him read it. She let him sit with the full weight of what the paper meant. Every floor of the building they were sitting in, every contract he had ever signed, every promotion he had ever received. Every morning he had walked through the lobby believing he had built something. I built this, she said. I have always run this, and you have been here because I allowed it. The room was very quiet. Gerald Watkins will contact your attorney this week regarding the separation. I suggest you retain someone experienced. She gathered her folder. She pushed back her chair. She stood. Raymond did not speak again. There were no more sentences available to him. He sat in the boardroom chair with his hands on the table and the founding charter in front of him, and the particular hollowed-out stillness of a man who has just seen, for the first time, the full dimensions of the life he thought he understood. Delane did not look back. She walked out of the boardroom, down the hall, past the assistant station and the elevator bank and the small cluster of employees who parted quietly when they saw her coming. She rode the elevator down to the lobby. Kezia was at the front desk. When Delane came through the lobby doors, Kezia looked up, and something in her expression, careful, searching, the face of a woman who had worked 3 years in a building without knowing who owned it, said more than any words would have. Delane gave her a small, clean nod. She pushed through the glass doors and walked across the lobby's polished floor, through the main entrance and out into the morning light. 18 months is a long time. Long enough for begonias to come back fuller than the year before. Long enough for a name to mean something different than it used to. Long enough for the silence in a house to stop feeling like an absence and start feeling like a choice. Decatur, Georgia, a Tuesday. The light was still low, and gold the way it gets in early morning when the sun hasn't committed to anything yet, just laying itself soft across the yard in long, flat bars, catching the tops of things, the fence posts, the garden beds, the white rims of the clay pots lined up along the back step. The lane was already outside. The divorce had been final for 11 months. Gerald Watkins had done exactly what he said he would do, which was leave Raymond with his car, his personal accounts, and the clothes in his closet. Everything else? The house, the dividends, the assets held under Beaumont Capital, the quiet accumulated weight of 17 years of careful, deliberate building stayed exactly where it had always been, with her. Raymond's attorney had tried. Gerald had told Delane about the attempts with the neutral, slightly tired expression of a man describing a minor administrative inconvenience. There was nothing to contest. There had never been anything to contest. Raymond had signed the post-nuptial 3 years ago at a routine document renewal, at the kitchen table, with a pen she handed him, while the news played in the background. He had not read it carefully. He had not read it at all. He lived now in a 2-bedroom apartment off Piedmont Road, a complex she had driven past once, not on purpose, and had noted the way she noted everything. His professional network, the one he had spent years cultivating over golf lunches and conference handshakes, had gone quiet in the way networks do when the audit findings attached to your name become part of the public record, and people start doing rapid arithmetic about association costs. A few of his former colleagues had reached out to Delane privately. She had responded with warmth and not much else. She did not think about Raymond often. When she did, it was the way you think about a structural miscalculation you caught before the building came down, not with bitterness, just with the flat awareness that you caught it. Tanya's civil inquiry had moved through the process and settled into the public record the way these things do, not a headline, but a permanent fixture in the background of her professional name. Anyone who searched would find it. Most people in her field searched. She had relocated. Somewhere in Texas, Carla had mentioned, with the tone she used when something had resolved itself to her satisfaction. A smaller firm, a senior manager title, not VP, and from what Carla could determine from LinkedIn, which Carla monitored with the focused attention of a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to enjoy, the role had not grown. It did not appear to be growing. She and Raymond had not lasted a year. Without Meridian to hold them together, without the shared secret of it, the specific thrill of taking something from someone they had each decided didn't matter, there had apparently not been enough structure to keep the thing standing. Delane was not surprised. She had spent 17 years studying what held things up and what didn't. You could always tell. The Atlanta Business Chronicle had run the piece 4 months after the all hands. Front of the business section. The headline? Founder steps forward. The woman behind Atlanta's largest minority-owned commercial real estate firm. There was a photograph. Burgundy suit. She had smiled for it, not performing, just present, the way you are when you are standing in front of something you built and you have finally stopped pretending you didn't build it. Raymond had seen it at a BP station on a Saturday morning, according to Patrice, who had heard it from someone in his former circle who still talked to people who talked to Patrice. He had bought the paper with loose change. He had sat in his car in the parking lot and read it for a long time. Tanya had seen it on her phone, in Texas, at a desk smaller than any she had occupied since her career began. She had put the phone face down. Neither of them was mentioned in the article. There was no reason they would be. Beaumont Development Group had closed the fiscal year at $640 million in assets under management. Renata Cross, the new COO, had built her reputation on execution and referred to entitlement as the expensive habit. She and Delane did not overlap unnecessarily. Delane set the direction, Renata ran the operations. The firm moved with the clean, unencumbered momentum of something that had finally been allowed to be exactly what it was. The Gloria Beaumont Fellowship had accepted its first cohort in the fall, 6 young black women entering commercial real estate and structural engineering. Delane had read every application herself, at the kitchen table, with coffee. She had taken her time. Now it was Tuesday, early. The light was gold and the yard was quiet, and the begonias had come back this year fuller than last, which she took as the kind of information worth noting. Her phone was on the porch table. A text from Walter with the Q2 numbers was sitting unread. Somewhere inside, her coffee was getting cold. She picked up her trowel. She had work to do. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!